Hey, everyone, and welcome to the Eagle Eye Podcast presented by Nissan. We're out here at Rivers Casino, Philadelphia, out by the sports book. Reuben Frank, Dave Zangaro. Reuben, how you doing?
Doing well. Those comfy chairs in the sports book look awfully inviting. I would not stay awake very long in those chairs.
Neither would I, because college football was on at 8:45 last night. 8:45 start time.
What time did that game end? I didn't make it.
Late, like around 1, I think. It was late.
It's too late.
Yeah. And on New Year's Day, too. Like, I wasn't going crazy on New Year's Eve, but I stayed awake for a little bit after midnight. So now it's like 2 days in a row. I'm too old for this.
I didn't make it to midnight.
No?
No.
You got to make it to midnight.
No. I did some writing and around 11:30, and there were fireworks going off all over my neighborhood. I was like, I'm never going to get to sleep. Next thing I knew, it was like 7 the next morning.
There you go. Not bad. What is bad is that Eagles game on Sunday. And there have been so many times this year and even in recent years where we'll watch a loss or we'll watch a bad game that feels like a loss. And a few days later, we come in with some clear eyes and we go, you know what? It wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
There were some things they need to clean up, but everything's still pretty good.
They'll be fine.
No. Rewatched this game, have thought about it for the last couple of days, and it is just as bad now as it was Sunday night.
Yeah, and I didn't want to do one of those like, where does this rank all time? Because you want to have some distance between the game and kind of just let it, kind of just get context for it. And I mean, this is as bad as it gets. I mean, they just blew a 15-point lead against a 3-win West Coast team in their own stadium. A West Coast team coming east that was 4-45 in their last 49 East Coast games. And they didn't just lose. I mean, they just got hammered in the second half. It's as bad a loss. I've been doing this a while. There've been a few like really bad losses, but this has got to be in the top couple, 2 or 3, because the what was at stake, who the opponent was.
I think what's at stake was a really big part of this. They went into the day thinking, all right, they're going to get the 2 seed, and now they're on the road.
2 seed, win the division, and who knows, maybe,
the 1 seed was still on the table.
It was still in play. So to go from that to losing, blowing a 15-point lead at home to a 3-win West Coast team, it's unthinkable.
Yeah, it's the worst loss I've covered. I haven't obviously been doing it as long, but to me, it's the worst. They've lost by bigger scores,
right? And
they've played worse, I think, in games. Because at least the offense was able to do some things in that game.
Sure.
But you put it all together, the stakes, the expectations.
And the opponent, I think you have to.
And the opponent, sure, that's fair. Yeah, to me, it's the worst loss I've covered. And I started full-time in 2015, so a decent body of work there.
Yeah, I think of the loss, I guess it was Donovan's last season was 2009. Is that right? Mm-hmm. That loss to the Cowboys when it was a similar thing, and then they just got destroyed. Was it 23-0 or something? Because there was a lot at stake there too. But the Cowboys were a good team, and then they beat them obviously 6 days later in the playoffs. But it's in the top 3.
Yeah, and I think it's made even worse because for a lot of this season, we've tried to not completely recalibrate because they're winning games, and you're thinking, it's not going great, but they're still in a really good position.
Yeah.
And I'd kind of talked myself into that going into that Cardinals game, really without thinking about it too much, just because 11 wins, 2 more against inferior opponents, and you have the 2 seed. That's obviously a really good spot to be in, but all the issues that we saw throughout the year came back and bit them in this game.
Yeah, and their thing was always, we're winning, but we know we have things to fix, and they didn't fix them. They just got worse. Yeah,
and that's, we've talked about, it's funny, the standard, they've talked about it all year, and it's like, well, the standard's different right now because this team is not very good. They've tried to live up to what they were last year, and they are clearly not what they were last year in any of the 2 major phases. They're better on special teams. Give Michael Clay a round of applause, but in every other area, which is obviously more important, they are worse, significantly worse.
Yeah. And even since, you can really kind of go up through the Miami game too. Something just happened team-wide at that point. And there were signs of, certainly signs of things starting to go wrong, but I mean, it's not like last year and this year. To me, it's like last year plus the first half or first whatever games of this year. And since Buffalo on defense, since the 49ers really team-wide, they've gone from one of the best teams in football record-wise to one of the worst.
Yeah, you lose 4 or 5, you lose to the Cardinals. You have the Giants take it to the wire. You're not a good football team.
No.
It feels like this week it would be disingenuous if we came on here and just like talked about the Giants game and Week 18. Like we'll have to do that a little bit on Thursday because they are going to play a football game.
Can't wait for your matchups.
I have to do that, but we had to talk about big picture stuff, and I think a lot of the conversation this week, rightfully so, is going to center around Nick Sirianni because ultimately, like a lot of this is on him. He's the head coach, whether or not some of it's fair. Like, yeah, you can debate that, but he's in charge, and this team is not playing well. This team is not fundamentally sound. This team is making too many mistakes. This team doesn't know what it's doing some of the time.
It's true.
And like that has to fall on him. And I'm glad we didn't get into it too much on the post-game pod because I was probably a little too close to the actual game. But this week is the time to ask the question about, what is Sirianni's future here? And is it completely out of the realm of possibility that he's run his course?
Yeah, I think it's a fair question considering what's happened. I mean, it's something that, like, let's wait and see what happens in the playoffs. I don't have a whole lot of confidence in them beating any good team that they face. But, we'll see. Stranger things have happened. I can't think of any at the moment, but he's going to be back next year. It's not like Jeff Lurie to knee-jerk reaction. I mean, they're still a playoff team 3 years in a row. They're still an 11, 12-win team. They have the best record in the NFL since opening day last year. I don't think Jeff Lurie is going to just ignore all that, but I'm sure he's wondering, what exactly do I have here, and who exactly is he, and how much of their success last year was due to the coordinators who both got head coaching jobs, and they both miss, tremendously, clearly. I think he's earned the right to come back next year. If they were 4-10-1, 4-11-1, whatever they would be at this point, you could make a case. But coaches don't get fired a year after, and with 11 wins as well. So I just don't see Jeff Lurie. It's not like him to make that kind of change. Like, who are you going to get who can come in and, they're not a rebuilding team. So I think he'll be here. I think next year certainly becomes a huge year for him and for Howie and for everybody, but for him especially, because after what we've seen, this isn't just a bad finish. This isn't just people are comparing it to the Eagles in '94 when they were 7-2 and they lost their last 7 games and Cote got fired. But that was a house. That was a house of cards. That was not a good team. They weren't a good team the year before. Not 90, not 94. Yeah, 94. Yeah, my bad. 94. Kotite was not a good coach. He hadn't been to a Super Bowl. There's so many differences in that situation. I think Nick's earned a chance to show that what's happened these last few weeks isn't really who he is. But, yeah, make no mistake about it. They're the first team in history or they will be, unless the Cowboys lose and they win. They'll be the first team since 1986 to be 11-1 and not win their division. 11-1, 10-1. I'm sorry, 10-1 and not win their division. This is a historic collapse. But I'll be shocked if he's not here.
I agree with you. I think he will be back, and I think he deserves the right to fix this. But let me play devil's advocate here, because Nick Sirianni's strength is supposed to be building a culture and then being a CEO on game day, right? I don't think he is responsible for game day prep on the offensive side of the ball, but I think we've seen his scheme isn't super complex. And there are merits to why it should or shouldn't be, but it's not a super complex offense. It relies on playing to his players' strengths and his best players, which is, I don't want to get into that debate, but I don't think it's like he's doing things schematically that you couldn't find elsewhere. Right. I think the strength of Nick Sirianni is that he is building the right culture and that he's allowing his coaches to coach the way he wants it to be coached. They're fundamentally sound. And then on game day, he's supposed to be a CEO in charge of situations. Let's start with that because he hasn't been very good situationally this year and even before this. I think there are certainly moments where he's been okay, but there have been mess ups with the clock. There have been moments where he is way too conservative, and we saw that in the Super Bowl.
Yes, we did.
And we saw that last week, certainly. And then you look at the culture, and I don't want to start taking shots at his culture because I think, generally speaking, it's very strong. But when you're losing the way the Eagles are losing, I think you might start to see cracks in it. And we don't know what's going to happen in the Giants game or in the playoffs, but if those cracks start to get bigger and it becomes an issue and his message no longer gets through, could you see Jeffrey Lurie looking at this and saying, well, what is he bringing to the table? And I agree with you. I think he will be back next year. I think he's earned that. But those are all really valid questions that I think the owner is going to have to look at and say, what is this guy actually bringing to the table right now?
Yeah, I think that's all fair. And I think that is a thought process that Jeff will go through. And I think he'll have a sit down with Nick after the season and present those questions to him. And, you know, Nick, I'm sure Nick will have answers that include getting new coordinators and who knows what else. I also think it's not, I mean, I think Howie's got a role in this too, because his roster construction, I mean, they're old and slow on defense. And, I mean, the roster construction on offense is pretty much, you know, I don't think anyone has a problem with it, but they got old and slow really fast. Now, some of that was a product of injuries, and he had to go out and get these free agents and older guys. But
you can also think that maybe he could have planned a little better.
Yeah,
on that side of the ball,
no question about it. So I think he's got some culpability. I think mainly it's on Nick. And I'll tell you what, I don't. Up until the last few days, I mean, everyone was blaming everything on Desai and Patricia and Brian Johnson. And I mean, don't forget that the head coach, they're all under the head coach. He's setting the tone for everything. It's his offense. It's his team. It's not technically his defense, but it's his team. But
on defense, they do play with at least the mindset that he wants them to play with.
Exactly right. And so in that way, it's his defense, maybe not his scheme, but his concept, his philosophy.
Yeah.
So and
it might not. It might fall in line with the organizational philosophy as well.
That's true. So I think these are all important questions and valid questions. I just don't see, and you know, some of this might even. I mean, if they get blown out 49-10 in Tampa or wherever they end up playing,
that would change things.
The question changes a little bit. I still don't think he would make a change, but it becomes a bigger question.
Sure. And you're right about the coordinators. And coaching staff is really where Doug Peterson and Jeff Lurie butted heads, and it led to Doug's dismissal after the 2020 season. And look, I think that was a good thing. I don't think we've reached that point with this team. That was a really awful team. This is not a really awful team. They're awful right now, but for the season, they're clearly not that bad.
I also don't think there'll be as much pushback on Nick's part with the staff. You never know.
I don't know about that,
really?
Though, because, you know, Doug was not in love with the process of hiring a coaching staff. I think that's well documented. Nick is. And it's one of the things that Jeff Lurie really likes about Nick is that he went through these exhaustive processes to find the coaches on his staff. And honestly, one of the big selling points of Nick when he came here was that he had these great coordinators ready to roll, and Jonathan Gannon was a big part of that. Jonathan Gannon was maybe a hotter name at the time than Nick Sirianni, and I think a big part of his sell was that, hey, I had this guy that I'm bringing with me. He doesn't have any of that right now. He does like Brian Johnson, and it's always going to be a tricky offensive coordinator spot under an offensive head coach. The sell here is that you get to call plays. The bad part is you get all the blame and none of the rewards.
Let's explore that for a second, because it's really hard to pinpoint sometimes exactly. I mean, Brian. We know Brian's the play caller, but like, how much is Nick in his ear, play to play, series to series, telling him, look, let's approach it this way, and it's there's no way to really know exactly, but I think it's more than anyone lets on.
How about what if when Nick calls a play, he has to raise his hand, so we know from the press box that one's on Nick. It's a great setup for him. He can call a play whenever he wants. If it doesn't work, everyone blames Brian Johnson.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at the sequence after the 10-yard penalty on Jordan in the fourth quarter Sunday, and I mean, I don't know. Look, I don't know for a fact that Nick was saying, "Hey, let's just make sure we get the 3 points here and get some points and make sure we." But that's his nature. I mean,
yeah, I think we've seen that before. Nick, by nature, is a little more conservative, and we saw that in the Super Bowl, and we've seen that at times throughout his time here. And it doesn't mean he doesn't go for fourth downs. He does, and there are certainly times where he pushes it. But I think he has to push himself to push it. I don't think that comes naturally to him. And when they're in a situation, 1st and 20 from the opponent 30, they played exactly into what Jonathan Gannon knew he would do. He knew he would sit in the ball, try to eat clock, and take the points. And Jonathan Gannon knew their defense had no answers at that point.
Yeah.
So they played exactly into their hand. And you hear Brian Johnson explain the thought process, and he's explaining the thought process of the team. And we, unless we get some truth serum in these guys, we won't really know whose decision it is and who philosophically makes those calls. But I have to wonder if Johnson is ever feeling handcuffed by Nick and the way Nick wants to operate.
I've got to think yes. I mean, I don't know that, but it just really seems that way. It really seems that way. And I mean, we were talking, I guess, in the parking lot or whatever after Brian's presser today, and he was asked. He said, our approach on the and he changed. He said my approach was like he was covering up, like that. It was, it wasn't all him. It wasn't him. I think he's the fall guy in a lot of situations. Now, I'm not saying he's done an incredible job, but I think it's more Nick than him. I really do.
It's tough to say.
It's tough to say.
And honestly,
that's my sense.
And it's almost a shame for them that we're talking about the offense this much, because they were clearly not the biggest culprits in that game. Defense is just a complete disaster. I think we have higher expectations for the offense.
And I think that one sequence really kind of crystallized the frustration.
Sure.
And
you see AJ walking with shaking his head. Like there's clear frustration about what was happening on offense.
Yeah. So, and the fact that that's Nick's side of the ball just makes it, to me, it makes it a more intriguing riddle than, I mean, we know the I mean, there's none of that intrigue with the defense. I mean, it's, well, we don't know which coordinator it is, but I just from talking to Brian Johnson all year and talking to Nick for 3 years, I just think Brian Johnson's a more aggressive coach, a more aggressive play caller, and Nick is the conservative guy, and his reach is affecting the way Brian calls plays.
Yeah, it's really tough to know, but I think you're probably right. And then we had a chance to talk to Nick Sirianni on Monday after the game, and I'm always curious about what he's going, not what he says necessarily, but how he's going to act, because we've had really combative Nick press conferences after games, just pushing back on anything, and this was the exact opposite. He kind of walked into this one, every question was a good question, and he's trying to answer. He's trying to take blame, and I thought that was purposeful, because at this point in the season, like, yeah, it's awful.
Well, I think he could get away with being defiant, and when you're 14-3 or 8-1 or 10-1 this year, I mean, you can do that. You can, but the way things have gone the last 5 weeks, I don't think that would go over too well. I mean, he's already, seems like he's already lost a lot of the fan base. And being defiant, coming out and taking that attitude after that loss would have been a huge mistake. Now, I don't know if he was prepped to do that or not. But it was interesting, certainly, to hear him take that approach.
Anything from that press conference really stand out to you?
It was really just his demeanor more than anything. But, I'd asked him about the second half. The blown leads in the second half, the bad second halves. And he on his own brought up he could have been more aggressive in that one sequence from the 20 on the field goal drive. And he started out by saying, I like those play calls, but I could have been more aggressive. And, you want to say, well, why weren't you? Like, if you could have been, like, if you should have been, he's got to learn from these things. And I think that's why he gets next year, to see if he has. But you don't hear him like that very often.
Yeah, he came out and admitted it on his own.
Yeah, I mean, it was my question, but I didn't ask about that sequence. I asked about the blown leads, and I mean, it didn't directly. I mean, that really had no effect on the blown leads. They had one more. They had one more touchdown to score, but it was definitely something he wanted to share at that point.
Mm-hmm. I asked him about whether or not he regrets demoting Sean Desai, and look, I didn't expect him to say, yeah, I shouldn't have done that. That was bad. But sometimes you read between the lines a little bit. What a disaster. Just what an absolute disaster. I understand a shakeup, but making Sean Desai the fall guy, and that's not to say he was doing a job. He wasn't doing a good job. But to think that Matt Patricia calling Sean Desai's defense was somehow going to fix all of this is insane to me. You turn to Matt Patricia, who's never had a good defense ever on his own.
Yeah, no, you're right.
It's mind-boggling to me. Matt Patricia has no answers, and there's no other move to make. You're stuck with what you have.
They're worse.
Mm-hmm.
They're considerably worse with Matt Patricia. I think the timing of it was intentional. All right, we got the gauntlet out of the way. Now we have the Seahawks with a backup quarterback, and the Giants with a backup quarterback, and the Cards with a sick, injured quarterback, underachieving quarterback who wants to play baseball. So it's a perfect time to make the change. We'll get the defense's confidence up, and it's going the complete opposite way. I mean, it's not like Sean Desai was doing this great job, but. And look, I was in favor of the change when it happened, because my thing was you have to change something. You can't keep going this way. But maybe I was wrong. I mean, it's been worse than I imagined. And you're right. It's a really untenable situation when you can't change the whole defense. And in week 15, whatever it was when they made the change. So you end up with one guy calling plays from another guy's defense.
Yeah. It's unfair to Sean Desai. It's unfair to Matt Patricia, and it's unfair to the players.
Yeah.
And it's such a desperation move that when it doesn't work, you have all this egg on your face. And to me, that's like going to be one of the lasting memories of this season.
Yeah.
Is that they somehow thought Matt Patricia was going to save the day. And I say they because Nick has to say it's his decision. But that is not a decision he makes in a vacuum. Like,
sure,
clearly, and maybe that wasn't even his suggestion. That part is really tough to figure out. But certainly, the front office at least has to okay it, if not initiate it.
I mean, look, we know Jeff Lurie's Jeff Lurie's a former Patriots season ticket holder. Mm-hmm. I remember standing in the old stadium in Schaefer Stadium, and he pointed out where his family used to sit to me. He grew up in Boston. He tried to buy the Patriots. I mean, the Patriots are on his radar when you have a team that wins all those Super Bowls and has the best, quarterback ever and the winningest head coach ever. As far as Super Bowls, then and then you see a prominent assistant, from that program. I'm not saying it was his decision, but it's got his fingerprints on it.
Yeah.
I mean, he's always been obsessed with the Patriots.
I totally agree.
Which is why I wasn't entirely kidding when I said Belichick could be this team's head coach next year.
I'd be very shocked at that.
I would too. But if it does, get ready for pressers at 9 a.m. and locker room at 5.
Hey, I get to be at the building a little bit more. I like that.
Zach Berman would be the happiest guy
Hey,
on earth.
I'll be happy too. No, I wouldn't be that. That'd be tough. We talked a little bit about Brian Johnson's press conference. Anything else from that stood out before we talk about Matt Patricia?
No, that one little thing really struck me. I think with Brian, you see him really kind of struggling sometimes to answer questions because he's trying to. I mean, it's a tricky thing because if you're being asked these questions about why this didn't work and it's not your thing, it's not your play, it's not your concept, you can't, say, well, that was Nick. You can't say, oh, that was Nick. He wanted to run those plays. What was he thinking? You can't do that. So you have to time after time, take the hit and try to explain the thought process that you might have disagreed with.
And it's not uncommon in the NFL because typically a head coach is from one side of the ball or the other, and typically it's normally offense. So there are offensive coordinators throughout the league in the same position. So it's not like this is rare, but it is something they have to deal with on a weekly basis.
True. But this is kind of extreme, just because things just aren't going well.
I don't know. Yeah, it's magnified.
Yeah, magnified, extreme, whatever. But I think he's in a very difficult position, and I think it kind of comes through in his answers. There's these long pauses where he's like, all right, what's the most politically correct way to say this without getting myself in trouble? It's not an easy job.
Yeah, I agree. And look, he hasn't done well.
He hasn't done well. Yeah, that's. I mean, although they are the number 8 offense in the league, I still don't think he's had a great year. But I also think that the defense is 10 times the problem as the offense.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And Matt Patricia had no answers in the game. Did he have any answers on Tuesday when we spoke to him?
I mean, nice guy.
That's never a good start. That's like saying about a quarterback, his teammates love him.
Yeah.
He has good height, as Doug Peterson once said about Clayton Thorson.
Good height. Yeah, and he has no answers.
You're talking about the defensive coordinator. You start with he's a nice guy. Pack it in.
Yeah, Buddy used to say, I know it's when I started, Buddy used to say, my kids are nice guys. I don't want them coaching. And then, of course, they both became coaches, but they were little kids back then. But he just kept saying we have to do better. I mean, it's the same stuff we've heard.
Yeah, he talked about run fits a little bit.
Yeah,
because they were awful.
The run fits were
against the run.
Terrible.
Yeah, they looked lost. And
it was funny on the post game show. Amy Fadul was filling in, and on the show she's like, I don't think you're supposed to have 3 guys in the same place on a running play. And it was embarrassing.
Yeah, they've got to get that fixed, and they don't have time to fix it. So
no.
That stood out. He was asked about Hassan Reddick dropping in coverage, which happened more than it should in this game. I don't think it's like the biggest issue with the defense, but it isn't good.
No,
and it was like the way that the Cardinals were able to manipulate them into dropping Reddick in coverage is emblematic of a bigger problem.
Right, that's the problem. I think tackling was a huge problem. It was probably their worst tackling game of the year. I haven't looked at the analytics yet, but I mean, so many missed tackles, and just bad form, just bad tackling form, not getting numbers to the ball, guys taking bad angles to the ball. I mean, Connor's a nice player, but I mean, gosh, he's not that good. I mean,
yeah, he's good.
He's good.
He's bigger than most of the guys who are trying to tackle him.
Yeah,
which is a little bit of roster construction.
Yeah, well, I mean, they just look old and slow on defense. I mean, you just like seeing guys like Van Sumeren and Ringo and Sidney are going to make mistakes, and they certainly had their share of them. But at least they can run. I mean, some of these guys are running out there. And I was encouraged by Shaq in the Giants game. He played better.
At this point in his career, he's going to look okay running downhill.
Yeah.
And it was a little bit of fool's gold, I think, in the Giants game because that's the plays he made. And they were good plays. They were running downhill. He got a head full of steam,
right,
and he made those plays. If you get him in space, he is a liability at this point in his career.
But all the linebackers are. If all the linebackers are healthy, who do you start? I think Morrow and Cunningham.
Cuttingham for sure, and then you probably have to start Morrow because you want him to be the green dot. Yeah, it's not a good situation.
You know who's been disappointing during this stretch is Blankenship.
I agree with that.
For a while, it was like, well, at least Reed's playing well. He hasn't. He's been out of position. He's missed tackles. We know he got beat on the deep ball, but
you expect him to get beat on the deep ball.
Yeah, that's not
everything else.
That's not his strength. Being at the line of scrimmage and being physical is his strength. And I think sometimes you see this with undrafted guys. They kind of have a point of diminishing returns. Is that the phrase where
you use that phrase so much, and every time you go, is that the right
I don't think I use it that much.
You use it quite a bit.
When's the last time I used it?
Maybe about Reed 2 weeks ago.
No. But you know what I mean. Sometimes with undrafted guys, that's the danger of playing these guys, and he played really well in those 4 games when CJ was hurt last year, and thought he got off to a good start this year, but
he was steady at least in the beginning of the season.
Yeah, he was fine, but he has not been fine, and so now you're like, all right, we kind of had him earmarked for one of the safeties, and maybe Sidney somewhere in there next year. I don't know. There's a lot of questions, but I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves because we'll have plenty of draft shows between now and April.
Yeah, I thought about talking about, the hire of the next defensive coordinator. I thought about putting that on our little show script today, and then I realized we're going to have quite a bit of time to talk about that.
Yeah, well, depending when everyone gets fired.
I think we'll have quite a bit of time to talk about that. The last coordinator, I don't want to leave Michael Clay out because that'd be unfair to him.
Yeah.
His unit's done really well, and we talked about him quite a bit last year. So we didn't have a lot of questions for Michael Clay. When things are going well, you don't really have a ton of questions. But he did bring up the onside kick, and I thought that was a really good point by him that Ben Van Sumeren kind of alerted Eli Ricks, and they were both ready for the onside kick. They saw something unusual from the kick team on Arizona and were ready for it.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. That was like one of the few positives in that game. And they might have been better off not recovering, but no, probably not.
No, I mean, maybe.
Van Sumeren saw a different alignment than they usually have and alerted Eli. And it's pretty heads-up play by an undrafted rookie who's just started playing.
Yeah, and 2 undrafted rookies.
Well, Ricks has been playing, but they're both undrafted rookies. But, I mean, Van Sumeren just started playing a couple weeks ago. I mean, Ricks has been playing all year. But, yeah, for both of them. But they knew it was coming. And somebody asked Michael Clay, did you alert those guys? They're like, no.
He does say that he like has a last few bit of words every time they go out there. And one of them is always make sure you see them kick the ball.
See the kick.
Don't turn your head because then they'll steal one on you.
And that's when – I mean, that was a Harbaugh thing. I remember him talking about that. If they saw guys cheating back a little bit, man, they would onside kick every time, and they'd always recover it. And that was maybe the highlight of the game. Was the onside kick?
Not a good sign.
Not a good sign.
All right, let's take a break. We'll talk a little bit about A.J. Brown on the other side, and also a little bit about Howie Roseman, who should not skate by either.
Sure.
You deserve a car that thrills you, a car that puts goosebumps on your goosebumps. At Nissan, we got everything from turbocharged SUVs to 100% electric vehicles that'll make your heart beat faster. Experience the thrill for yourself and shop your local Nissan store and nissanusa.com today.
Celebrity cook Steve Martorano brings his Italian-American cooking back home to Philly. Enjoy Martorano's Prime at Rivers Casino and Steve's famous meatballs with Sunday gravy, prime steaks, and more. Make reservations at Martorano's Prime on Open Table.
All right, Rube, let's talk about A.J. Brown a little bit. He's a big topic of conversation. Nick Sirianni was asked about A.J. and the possible source of his frustration, and while Nick said he wasn't going to give any theories. He gave a theory, and it's one that I think we all kind of understand, is that A.J. wants the ball in key moments, and he's not getting it.
No, I mean, it's been, I think, 5 games in a row without a touchdown, but his numbers since that 125 streak ended, I mean, his numbers are way down. I think he's like 19th in receiving yards in the league over the last 6 weeks, which you have a guy like that, that can't happen. And look, some of that's on Nick, some of it's on Brian Johnson, some of it's on Jalen. A little bit's on AJ, who's had a couple drops in there, but when you have a talent like that, and we were talking in the auditorium before the coordinators were all talking about like who's, T.O., AJ, Quick, who's the best wide receiver we've ever seen with the Eagles, and he's it. And to see him this underutilized, and Brian Johnson even said, I asked him about his lack of catches, and he's like, sometimes you just got to force it to him.
Well, they didn't.
They haven't, and I mean
At times they have. They didn't do it on Sunday.
But it's a tricky thing because when he did it against Seahawks, he got picked off. Mm-hmm. So they got to find a way. And I know teams are doubling him. He's got a lot of attention, but you got to find ways to get him the ball. And
especially in key moments. And that kind of brings it back to a 1st and 20 from the opposing 30, and there's not a target for A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, or Dallas Goedert.
On that whole series.
Yeah, and we know the first 2 are runs, and the third one is a screen pass to Kenny Gainwell.
Whose longest catch of his career is 20 yards, by the way. So, it was 3rd and 19. So he could have gotten it with the longest catch of his career. This
is really stupid, but Brian Johnson, it's going to be really annoying to have to write about it because
he said the 3rd 20.
But it was a 3rd and 19. He said they lost 4 yards. They only lost 3 yards on 2nd down. And
did that bother you a little bit that he didn't know that?
No.
Okay.
It doesn't really change anything.
No, but
it bothers me when I have to write it and write around.
Put parentheses around.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Just change it. I won't tell anyone. Who cares about ethics? But yeah, they've got to find a way. He's too good to be just pedestrian, to be putting up pedestrian numbers. And Brian Johnson's thing was he's still on pace for a career year. And yes, but when you have 125 yards 6 weeks in a row, you're going to be ahead of that pace significantly, and he's not the last few weeks. It does remind you of Macklin's season in 2014. He was on the same kind of pace, and then Foles got hurt, and Sanchez had to play, and Macklin's numbers went way down.
Yeah, I mean, Jalen hasn't gotten hurt. Jalen's gotten healthier.
Yeah. Well, how do you think Jalen's playing? How do you think he played Sunday?
It was fine.
I have no complaints about Jalen.
It was fine. I think he probably made the wrong read on that 2nd and long, but he was far from the biggest problem.
Yeah, the 2nd and
16.
16.
Yeah,
it was a good play by Budda Baker.
It was, and that doesn't even matter. I thought Jalen was fine.
Yeah, and that's the one thing that kind of when you look at what a mess this team is. When they do rebuild, and we're getting ahead of ourselves, you start with an elite quarterback. There's worse places to be.
Exactly, and you have some really good cornerstone talent still here that will probably still be here.
Sure. And by the way, I don't know. I'm gonna. This isn't on the script, but I want to throw this out there because this is important.
Okay, cool. Can we finish talking about AJ though?
Yeah. Oh, I thought we were. Go ahead.
No, I just want to bring up. There's been so much talk about him not speaking to reporters. He didn't talk after the Giants game. After a win, he said there was nothing to say. He said that's when he said, if I have nothing nice to say, don't say anything. And then he doesn't speak during the week. And then after this loss, he says there's nothing to say. Clearly frustrated, clearly an emotional guy. He can't hide his frustration. I think that's just who he is. Do you view that as a negative? Because he's a captain on this team.
Yeah, here's what I think. I think when he doesn't talk, people jump to conclusions. Everyone's, social media is, he hates being here. He wants to get traded. He hates the coaches. I mean, it probably couldn't hurt for him to.
It's more than it's more than him not talking, though. It's the body language, and I know we have to take all those things with a grain of salt, but
sure.
We see it. It's on the broadcast. It's on the tape. His teammates see it, and I think he generally he's a really good teammate. I think
he's always been that way, though.
He has, but now he's in a spot where he has a C on his chest.
Yeah,
I think he's a good dude. I think he's a good teammate. Do you think there's any worry about that?
I don't think it helps. I don't think it's ideal.
Okay.
I'm not sure how big a deal it is.
I don't want to paint him to be a villain because I really don't think he is.
No, I don't think
he's not
is.
T.O.
No, he's not T.O. I mean, the one thing T.O. and him have in common is they want the ball, but I think AJ's really a team guy. I really do.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's a team guy first, who wants the ball, who thinks that him getting the ball is going to help the team. Where T.O., he just wanted the ball because he wanted stats, because he wanted more money. I really don't see any similarities, but
that's interesting, like the causation of why they want the ball.
Yeah. Yeah, I never felt like T.O. wanted the ball because he wanted to help the team. That's just from being around him. And he never talked either, by the way. So they have that in common. Although he was a great interview when he did talk.
And I like talking to AJ. And he did mention after the game that it wasn't like directed toward the reporters, because I think we've had a pretty good relationship with him.
Oh, yeah.
Since he's been here.
Yeah.
I've really enjoyed getting to know him a little bit. And I appreciate when he does talk to us, because he really does try to give some insight.
He's very thoughtful,
Mm-hmm.
but he wears his heart on his sleeve like nobody else. And so I can see.
And he knows himself.
Yeah, I can see
he
the
doesn't want
thought.
to get himself in trouble.
Exactly. I mean, he knows if he talks, he's going to say something he regrets. And I don't think he can really control that part of it. So he doesn't talk. But I'm sure we'll talk to him again, maybe OTAs.
All right. You wanted to shoehorn in something here? I'm guessing it's stats?
Just a Jalen thing.
Stats?
He did break the it's not
Stats.
really a stat. It's a Jalen thing.
Stat.
He broke the team record for most touchdowns in a season.
What is that?
What is it?
That's a stat.
It's a fact. That's not a stat. And also, he now had Sunday was his 50th career start.
Mm-hmm.
He has 107 touchdowns in those 50 starts. That's the seventh most in history, combined rushing and passing, behind Mahomes, Marino, Unitas, Deshaun Watson, Josh Allen, and Darryl LaMonica, and tied with Aaron Rodgers, and one ahead of Lamar. Lamar almost caught him. And then Culpepper got off to a great start in 2004. Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow, Kurt Warner, Andrew Luck, and Len Dawson. But, yeah, I just don't want to lose sight of just – I mean, he's been really good. I mean, he's had his moments where he wasn't. But when you look at this collapse, I don't think a whole lot of it's on Jalen.
I agree with that. I think he hasn't played as well this year as he did last year.
No question about it. I think some of his decision-making certainly has been spotty, but rather have him than Tommy DeVito.
Well, that's for sure. Thank you for those facts.
Yes.
We don't get to talk to Howie Roseman during the season.
No.
We probably won't talk to him until the Combine.
Unless they hire a new coach, we'll talk to him.
Right? Yeah, unless they hire a new coach.
Well, the Combine's before. The Combine's next month.
Probably the next time we talk to Howie Roseman.
Yeah, he doesn't do like a year-end thing. He talks like 4 times a year.
Yeah.
Final cut day, Combine,
Owners meetings.
I mean, if they're in the Super Bowl, he talked at the Super Bowl, but I don't think he's going to be doing that.
I've got to travel a lot to talk to Howie Roseman these days.
Yeah, he never talks in Philadelphia.
He'll do a pre-draft.
He'll do a pre-draft, right? That's the other one. So we'll talk.
But that's really geared toward the draft.
And the pre-draft. Yeah, so the Combine will really be the next opportunity to talk to him. And it's a shame, because you get good information from him, usually.
Yeah, and he's arguably the biggest key decision maker in the franchise.
Sure.
So I thought it'd be fun to come up with some questions for Howie right now. If he walked in this room and said, "All right, guys, I'm ready to answer some questions," I don't fancy our chances.
We did see Harold Carmichael here once. But
That's true.
Never seen Howie.
What would you ask him?
First question, what's your confidence level in Nick to be able to turn this thing around?
Point blank.
Point blank.
I would ask him if some of the failures defensively this season have altered the way he thinks about the construct of the team philosophically.
That's good.
Because we know that there are certain positions he's going to kind of punt on, and linebacker is one of them. But to go into it with the linebackers he had this year, even if they thought Nakobe was going to be serviceable,
right?
They didn't really do anything. They brought in Nicholas Morrow. They brought in Zach Cunningham in August. And then they signed Ben Van Sumeren after the draft.
Don't forget, They gave away Christian Ellis.
Mm-hmm.
Miles Jack retired and came back as a Steeler.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely a good one.
And then at safety, too. They didn't really address that, and it was a problem, and then they tried to rectify it by trading for Kevin Byard, and it didn't work. Now, you can give them a little bit of a pass on that because they did try to re-sign C.J. Gardner-Johnson, and they didn't get that done. But then you look at, like, they put money into positions that have been disappointing this year.
Yeah.
Money and resources, I should say.
I guess my next question would be, when, and we've talked so much before the Jalen contract that he signed back in the spring, but how do you make sure you're able to surround him with, enough talent to win when that contract is taken up so much? And it's not even, the cap numbers aren't even that huge, but they're significant. And that probably ask him that.
That's fair. I would ask him honestly about Jordan Davis. And I think it's time to have that conversation about if they're getting enough out of the 13th pick. And it's too early to call his career one way or the other.
Sure.
He's been an okay player, but they drafted him 13th overall. And they drafted him because they thought there was a ton of upside as a pass rusher, because they thought he was a special, unique type of player. And he's been okay. At
times he's been better than okay, but they've been I would say few and far between, but mostly the first 6 weeks of the season. And that's a concern because his plays dropped off. His production's dropped off. That's fair. Might ask you about, it's probably too soon for that question about Nolan Smith, but I would consider it. But, I'd ask him about what lessons he's learned from having so many guys in their 30s on the defense, and and how closely he connects the performance of the defense over the second half of the season with the age of the defense. And
to piggyback off that a little bit, you brought this point up, I believe, last week, is having a bunch of different guys who haven't been here for a long time, kind of mercenary type players. How does that affect the culture of a team? For so long, the Eagles have felt like they've had a culture to pretty much swallow anything.
Yeah.
And to get the most out of all these players. But I think sometimes the buy-in level is just different from a guy on a one-year deal or a guy who gets traded here in the middle of a season. And I'm not saying about anyone in particular, but I think that is a general concern. And then when you don't see the results, I think it's fair to question whether or not they're getting that.
Yeah, I the more I thought about that, and it was just kind of an offhanded comment I made during the pod. I think it was post-game.
They all run the game.
Yeah, I think it was post-game, but it could have been Thursday. But I think it doesn't mean they're bad guys. It doesn't mean they're not motivated. It's just different when, like, I was talking to Keely the other day about him and Eli Ricks and Sidney Brown and how close they are. We're growing up together. We're learning how to become pros. We're learning how to become young men. Be responsible, and we're doing it together. And when you're out there playing for, like, in 3 years, they're going to be playing for guys that they've grown up with as teammates and friends. And that's just different than when you have Bradley Roby from here and Shaq Leonard from here and Kevin Byard from here and, who else? I mean, it's just different. And it's not really even a knock on the other guys, but that's why it's so important to draft well. And that was something Andy Reid really believed in, was the fewer outside guys you could bring in, the better you could build that culture and maintain it. And we might be seeing a little of that.
Yeah, it's tough to tell, but I like that theory, and I think it's at least something worth questioning.
Yeah.
All right, those were just some that I had.
Yeah.
Anything else from you?
Let's just remember them in February.
We might have a whole new batch of questions by then.
That's true. Yeah.
You have anything else before we wrap this pod up?
No. I hope everyone had a good New Year's.
Yeah. I made it to midnight. You did not.
I did not. Well, it was game day, and
it was a long day.
Started early.
Through. It was funny. One of my friends had a party, and I was able to use work. I was done work by 10 o'clock. I very well could have gone to this party, but I decided to use work as an excuse and get some rest.
See, what I would have done was I would have gone to the party, brought my laptop, and worked on stats as the ball dropped.
I don't know why you would do that.
I wouldn't really do
Would you ever go to, have we talked about this? Would you ever go to Times Square?
I did twice.
Gosh.
I went to Times Square twice. And,
Seems like why?
well, the dumbest thing was going the second time.
Yeah.
So the first time I went with a young lady who lived.
Oh, you went with a girl. That's why you went.
She lived in Brooklyn, and she was Mia Farrow's attorney. Isn't that interesting?
That was interesting.
Not then, but later she became that. But we went to a movie that got out at 11:45, and then we just wandered down. We were like 52nd Street. And we just wandered down. Back then, it was before 9/11. There wasn't security there is now, where you can't really move around. So we went down and then watched the ball drop. It was cool, and and then just took the subway, took the Q train back to her parents' house, whatever, I think. And then 2 years later, I went back with another friend from New York. And that's when I was like, I'm never doing this again. There's so many people, and it's so crowded. You can't move.
It's like my nightmare.
Yeah.
I'm very claustrophobic.
I am too.
And it scares the heck out of me.
Yeah. I've gotten more claustrophobic.
I have that to look forward to.
I avoid elevators.
Yeah.
Like, if there's any,
I'm a pretty big Tampa Bay fan.
Yeah.
This weekend, I do not want to have to go deal with that Superdome elevator.
Those Superdome elevators, I still have nightmares about them. Yeah. Someday we'll tell the story about the fourth quarter of the playoff game in 18.
I think we probably already have.
We might have, probably that night.
Yeah. All right. Let's wrap this up. We've been out here at the Rivers Casino Philadelphia Sportsbook. Thanks, as always, for having us. If you enjoy the Eagle Eye Podcast, please rate and subscribe wherever you get your pods. If you're watching on YouTube, please click that like button, subscribe there as well. That's it. We'll talk to you later this week. For Rube, I'm Dave. This has been Eagle Eye, presented by Nissan.